All right, everyone, it's your man Brett from the Skateboarding Show, back with a think piece. It's been a little while. Sorry, I've been sort of off doing other stuff. Nobody cares. I know no one cares, so it doesn't matter. Here with the conclusion of, is skateboarding a sport or an art? And it is part 3 of the 3-part series. And in part 1, we looked at what is a sport. Part 2, we looked at what is art. To summarize, sport is something that as its overarching and overriding motivation is competition. The point of a game of football is to find out who wins. The point of a game of tennis, the point of tennis is usually to find out who wins, let alone a game of tennis. You might train ball control in football, but that's so that you can apply it to a game of football and win a game of football. In art, we looked at the idea that there's interpretation. Yeah, you take a subject matter and you interpret it. There is a creative output. There is a creative process, but there might be creative processes and other things. So maybe one of the overriding, ultimate objectives of art, and therefore the reason it exists, is to interpret things. The musician interprets the notes. The painter interprets the color and the subject matter. The musician interprets their feelings using the notes. Yeah, there's an interpretation of something. So that might give away where skateboarding fits, because the ultimate answer is that skateboarding is neither a sport or an art. I know that. And we'll come to some of the responses that I got at some point as well in this video, maybe, if I remember, who knows. But I get the obvious answer that skateboarding is neither a sport or an art. It's this, that, or the other. It's skateboarding is whatever it is to each individual person. I totally get that, and I totally respect that, and I'm down for that. And that is ultimately the real answer. And to classify it as either one of only two things is very restrictive, and I get that. It's not very broad. It was just a point of discussion, that's all. Because ultimately some might say that skateboarding has competition in it. I don't think that's the ultimate objective of skateboarding. I don't think we go skateboarding so that we can apply it to the game or the competition of skateboarding. One can go skateboarding just for the point of skateboarding in and of itself. So a perfect example of this is gymnastics. One can go and practice gymnastics, and in fact gymnastics is quite similar in so much as you have tricks in gymnastics. You have things that you want to perform. Now you might well strive to perform those as perfectly as possible. Funny enough, a little bit like skateboarding. But one can, and gymnastics does exist in and of itself, purely for itself. Competitions have been laid upon things like gymnastics and skateboarding. So skateboarding competitions exist, they totally exist. They've existed nearly all the time in skateboarding. But that is not the ultimate objective. That is not the reason why skateboarding exists. Skateboarding does not exist to apply to a game of skateboarding or a competition of skateboarding. It exists in and of itself. Anything to do with sort of football training exists to apply to a game of football. Anything to do with learning how to control and manipulate a racket and hit a tennis ball exists so that you can apply it to a game of tennis. That's why tennis exists in its game version. Nothing more, nothing less. Any training that you do is done to apply to that game of tennis. Any skateboarding you do is not done to apply it to a game of skateboarding or to a competition of skateboarding. However, that said, and I appreciate I'm using sort of semantics in this next part, perhaps there is a competition in skateboarding. Perhaps we are competing against ourselves to try and do better than we did last time. But that's not the sport definition of competition. The sport definition of competition would be to beat your opponent, not to beat yourself. What we're aiming, you know, beating ourselves could also be framed as striving for perfection, which is also funny, because that's possibly what the artist is trying to do. Possibly the artist, there's a reason why nobody sits in front of a piano as a musician and goes, I've completed all this. I've won piano. I've won the piano. I've won playing the piano. I've competed against everyone else and won. And so I'm done. I've done it. I've done all of piano. Because A, there is no end, and B, you're striving for that perfection of your art form. You're striving for a more perfect interpretation of how you're feeling, or a more perfect interpretation of the 12 notes, or variations in between. So, do we interpret something when we go skateboarding? So, first of all, skateboarding doesn't exist with an ultimate objective of competition as its uppermost objective, where there's nothing above that. There is something. Competition is not the ultimate objective of skateboarding. Is interpreting the ultimate objective of skateboarding. Do we go out and interpret the ramp and interpret the street spot? We absolutely do, yes. Yeah, we do. Does that make skateboarding an art form? In some respects, it might well do, yes. But I also get... I know that if you... I get that the moment you label skateboarding, everybody goes up in arms and everybody has got an opinion about it. And it's quite interesting that, of course, one of those opinions is you're overcomplicating things. I wonder if that's an opinion that has been perpetuated by the skateboard industry, because, of course, selling skateboards is all about letting people know that skateboarding it's simple and it's fun and it's great, because that sells skateboards. If you told the truth about skateboarding, that it can be complicated, it can be hard to learn, you're going to face real mental struggles as well as physical struggles. Like, if you at some point are not head in hands going, what am I doing with my life and with this right now, then one might argue you're not skateboarding. You're taking it easy and you're cruising at 25%, and you're not pushing yourself and striving for more and better. You're not striving for better. You're not striving for progression, right? And so therefore, and you know, like marketing skateboarding, no industry person, no brand, no person who runs a shop or whatever it is they do, nobody, when somebody walks in that shop or when somebody goes to the website of that brand, they are not going to see or hear, are you sure you want to buy a skateboard? Because it's going to be years of hard work and dedication and mental and physical struggle and emotional struggle that you'll have to go through. And you will get the greatest sense of achievement you've ever had in your life. No. All that takes far too long. What people want is a quick soundbite. Skateboarding's fun, right? Skateboarding, and so when somebody comes along and thinks about skateboarding and does a quick 15-minute, you know, these are not TED Talks. This is not overcomplicating skateboarding. Simply looking into the question of, is skateboarding a sport or an art, is not overcomplicating skateboarding. Okay, I will not contribute to the dumbing down of society, including the dumbing down of my beloved skateboarding. There's no way. Right, it is perfectly normal. These are the sort of normal, mundane conversations I have with people at a skate park, because most of the skateboarders I know are intellectually capable of having a discussion about thought. This is not overthinking. This is just simply thinking. So I know and completely understand that when you label skateboarding, whatever label you give it, it's not actually the full answer. It's never the full answer. To call skateboarding an art is not the full answer, because there is a slight competitional element to it, like we just described. You're competing against yourself. That's not quite the sport definition of competing, but you are competing against yourself. And skateboard competitions are such a part of the skateboard culture that unless you really look into it dialectically, it might be easy to think that competition is the point of skateboarding, especially with things like games of skate. You know, I grew up without games of skate. That wasn't a thing that we were doing. We were out trying to perfect our own skateboarding in whatever way that might be. Now, so that also brings me on to some of the responses that I got. As you can tell, one of the responses I got was, "You're overthinking this." I'm not overthinking it. It's just called thinking. It's not overthinking. It's just called skateboarding is intellectual. To interpret what you can do, you have to think for yourself down the skate park. You have to think for yourself at the street spot. You have to interpret a street spot. We are that capable of thinking that we as skateboarders walk down the street and go, "Oh, look at that, I could jump from there to there, I could ollie onto that bit of wall that is like got a weird bank bit to it, and then like maybe 180 off, or shove it off, or kickflip off, or no comply, or whatever it is." Like, wow, okay, that bit of street architecture that has nothing to do with skateboarding, I can now interpret that and do skateboarding on it. Right, that requires me to think for myself. That's all I'm doing with this. It's not overthinking. It's not overcomplicating it. It's not bad for skateboarding. It's bad for skateboarding when we dumb down skateboarding, just like the rest of society is getting dumbed down. Everything's getting dumbed down, and it's embarrassing, and I'm not going to be part of it. And if you're watching this, and I'm not asking you to agree with anything I'm saying, I'm just simply provoking a bit of thought, that's all. If you're listening to this and going, "Oh yeah, it gives me something to think about, yeah, I don't agree with what he's saying, but it's an interesting perspective to think," then great, good for you, thank you very much. If you think that I'm overthinking this, then you're welcome to hit the unsubscribe button wherever that is, because it's possible that you're just contributing to the dumbing down of society, and I don't want to know. Some people came up with some ideas. It's a toy. Well, that describes the actual skateboard. That doesn't describe the activity that we do with it. And although I don't necessarily disagree, and I don't disagree that we do an element of playing with it, so playing would be a better description, I don't think that is the full picture, because of course, if I sat in the middle of the skate park on my bum, holding the skateboard in one hand and spinning the wheels in the other hand, and said, "I'm playing it, I'm playing with my skateboard, therefore I'm skateboarding," I'm sure that soon enough people would say, "Could you get out of the way, because we're trying to do actual skateboarding here?" Because again, we know there's no rules, but of course there are rules, aren't there? Of course. So another reason why skateboarding can sometimes fit in like the sport definition, because there are boundaries. There are objectives. There are things we're looking to achieve with a skateboard. We say there are no rules and it's free and it's creative, and it is. There are massive boundaries, but they do exist. They are real. They are unspoken, and therefore in some ways they are more enforced than written down rules, because they're sort of like a societal, like a cultural norm that we have within skateboarding. You generally need to be stood on it with both feet on it in some way or another. 1 foot touching the floor is acceptable. 2 feet touching the floor if it's super creative, or if that's your style, okay, that's fair enough. But generally speaking, we want both feet on the board, you stood on top of it and manipulating it in some way. So we all know that there are some boundaries and objectives. So it being a toy and it being something that we play with, sort of, there's elements of that for sure. And like I say, you can't categorize skateboarding into one thing. But it's not just that. Like I say, it's not just sport, it's not just art, although I veer more towards the art side of it. It has an element of being a toy, it has an element of play. Some people even put forward the idea that it's a puzzle. I kind of like that one, because like I say, there's a question to do with skateboarding. What are you going to do? That's the puzzle. What are you going to do with your body and your skateboard and the environment around you? And the answer is skateboarding, and how that manifests, and the tricks that you manifest, or the things that you do. Skateboarding is a question. That's what one could argue skateboarding is. Therefore, where does the idea of it being a question fit in between sport and art? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. The real point, as always, is just a little bit of provoking thought. We as skateboarders are invited to think for ourselves every time you step on a skateboard. I mean, if you just want to be told what to think by Thrasher magazine or whatever other magazine or brand or whatever it is that you have telling you what to think, then again, by all means, this may not be the channel for you. And go and do that. You are perfectly entitled to go and do that. You are perfectly entitled to not think for yourself and to be told what to think and what to do with your skateboard. That's not the skateboarding that I know. The skateboarding I know invites me to think for myself. The skateboarding I know says, here's the skate park, and you don't have a grading system. There's no certain standard tricks that you have to achieve before we'll let you go to the next bit of the skate park, or before you get your white belt or your blue belt or whatever. There's none of that. You are free, and you are free to do whatever you want. And the downside of that is you are free to do whatever you want. You have to think about it yourself. You have to think for yourself about what you're going to do on your skateboard, which again, for me, pushes it more over into the art side than the sports side. Somebody did say it maybe fits in that space between the two, where it's such a physical like sport, creative like art, like that. Somebody said they did a thesis on it, but they don't have a copy of it. I would have loved to have read that. And they talked about it being like a transcendental culture, you know, constantly moving, constantly changing. Love that as well. Of course it is. It's a culture. Of course it's a culture. It's a lifestyle. We know that. If you're still with me 16 minutes in, you're probably into the idea that it's a culture because you want to explore some more of that culture. You want to investigate it, nerd out on it a little bit, like listen to some of these ideas and think for yourself about what they bring up. So yeah, so that's I mean, I'll probably think of some other stuff as soon as I switch this off, but I think it was probably obvious that the conclusion I was going to come to is that it's both and neither. It's all of those things, and it's whatever it is for you. And I get that, and people are welcome. And I think that's the critical thing, actually. I think that's one of the things that we forget. There's a lot of people who've got an opinion about what skateboarding is, and they're willing to flick it out there and sometimes they'll flick it out there, and then I'll give like a counterpoint to it, and then they go quiet and I don't hear from them again. But that's up to them, of course. I think what a lot of people forget, and I want to make it very clear that I'm not forgetting this, and if any of my previous videos don't make this clear, then I apologize right now. Skateboarding is whatever you want it to be, and that's a positive and a negative. What that means is, whatever you say skateboarding is, you might say skateboarding is a sport, you might say it's a toy, you might say it's an art, you might say it's a puzzle. That's true, and it's true for you. It may not be true for someone else. So perhaps what we could do, and again, moving away from the dumbing down of society, is that instead of having these really fixed ideas that we have, that skateboarding is this and that's all it is, perhaps we could look at the idea that skateboarding is whatever it is for each individual person, and perhaps we could have some respect and awareness and tolerance of the idea that it's different for different people. So I might ask a thought-provoking question: is skateboarding art or sport? The real answer is it's whatever you say it is for you and for you alone. And whatever anyone else says it is, that is what it is for them. Skateboarding isn't anything. It's not owned by anybody. It doesn't matter if there's governing bodies. It doesn't matter what international sporting event it's part of. None of that owns or controls skateboarding. Skateboarding doesn't even exist. My skateboarding exists and your skateboarding exists. Skateboarding doesn't even exist. Like really though, like you can video a trick, but that video of the trick is just a video of the trick. It's not the trick. The trick exists in a moment and then disappears and fails to exist anymore. Dadaist art. It's a happening. It exists and then it disappears. And if you weren't there to see it, then all you get is a representation of the trick, not the actual trick. But again, we'll go into that another time maybe. This is a long one, nearly 20 minutes so far. Thank you for staying with me, and catch you all again soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.